a canoe.
It's a cliff on both sides. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. We're going into a death trap.
All camped out, everything was awesome.
We all drank, had a good old time. Eventually we ended up making our way all back to the campsite.
I woke up and I woke him up and I said, "Where's Lauren?" And he said, "She got up a while ago." He was like, "But I didn't feel her or anything." And I said, "Okay, have you seen her since?" And he said, "No." And I asked how long. He said he wasn't sure.
I honestly wasn't really worried about it because I didn't think anything had happened. I didn't think anything would happen.
We were like, well, maybe somebody came and got her. And then we went down to the boat dock and we waited and waited and waited. And almost seems like I'm a suspect right now, but I know you guys are just doing your job.
She didn't have her shoes. She didn't have her keys, wallet, phone. And she, would not leave without that stuff.
Lauren Agee was a 21-year-old student from Hendersonville, Tennessee. She lived with her mother Sherry, stepfather Michael, and her 3 siblings. She was in her second year studying criminal science at university and had recently started a great relationship. Popular, funny, outgoing, and sporty, Lauren was thriving in all aspects of her life, and she showed a lot of promise for her future. Mid-July 2015, just a few weeks shy of her 22nd birthday, Lauren told her mother Sherry that she had been invited to go to Wakefest on the last weekend of July. Wakefest is a 3-day-long festival based at Center Hill Lake in Nashville, Tennessee. People compete in wakeboarding tournaments and water sports during the day, and party and dance throughout the night. For sporty and sociable Lauren, this was an exciting opportunity, but her mum Sherry wasn't as keen on the idea. Sherry quizzed her daughter on the details, including who she would be going with. Lauren said she was going with her friend, Hannah Palmer. Sherry didn't entirely trust Hannah because of how much she was in and out of Lauren's life, and felt very uneasy about the situation. However, on Friday the 24th of July, Lauren and Hannah headed off for the festival. Sherry said as soon as her daughter started walking to the car, she begged her to come back for one last hug. She told Lauren to be careful and to take care. Lauren and Hannah were on social media documenting their road trip while en route to the festival. They arrived at Wakefest in the late afternoon, and sometime after, the girls met up with Aaron Lilly, Hannah's boyfriend, and his friend, Christopher Stout. Although the girls both knew Aaron, this was the first time they were meeting Chris. According to witnesses, Chris was attracted to Lauren and appeared glued to her, but she was in a happy relationship and she wasn't interested. They all drank, danced and partied in the bars into the late evening. Upon the group deciding to head to bed, Lauren received a shock. She was under the impression they would be sleeping in one of the cabins or on one of the houseboats. However, for unknown reasons, the sleeping arrangements were far from that.
We were in a canoe.
It's a cliff on both sides. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. We're going into a death trap.
They were actually camping at the top of a narrow cliff that stuck out over the water. Although it was never set up to be a sleeping location, it was common knowledge amongst everyone that this was somewhere you could go and camp if you chose to. Over the years, festival attendees had tied a rope to the trees that led to the cliff to help people reach the top. A few other people were camping up there as well, but Lauren's group consisted of Hannah, Aaron, Chris, and another slightly older man, Brixner Gambrell. Lauren had only packed a sleeping bag for the night, and it was evident that this new sleeping plan was not something she had prepared for. The cliff itself had a 90-foot drop down one side, and an almost 50-foot drop down the other. The boys had built a tent for Hannah and Aaron to sleep in, and a hammock for Chris and Lauren. This bothered Lauren as she had already made it clear that she wasn't interested in Chris. The hammock was suspended between 2 trees over the edge of the cliff, and this was undoubtedly hazardous and dangerous. The next day, Saturday the 25th, the group headed off for some more of the same, watching the water sports, drinking, dancing and partying. At some point during the day, the group allegedly decided to do some cliff jumping. The cliffs in the area were steep and high, and the water was filled with hidden rocks. It was alleged that when Lauren jumped, she hit the back of her head and was left unconscious for a few seconds. Despite this, Lauren seemingly recovered and appeared back to her normal self later that evening. The group carried on into the night and nothing seemed amiss. As the evening rolled round, another friend of Lauren's, named Cassie Franks, who was also at the festival separately, said she bumped into Lauren's group at the bar in the marina. Cassie was also the ex-girlfriend of Aaron Lilly. She, along with many others, said it was very apparent that Aaron's friend, Chris Stout, had taken a liking to Lauren, but the feeling clearly wasn't mutual. She reported that she felt like Lauren was having to put up with Chris, almost acting as Hannah's wingman. Lauren also raised her concerns with Cassie about going back to sleep on the cliff that night. Cassie knew the fear that Lauren was feeling all too well, as she had spent a night up there a few years prior. Lauren was so nervous that she asked Cassie if she could stay with her group instead. Cassie said she had to decline, as they had no more room. At some point during the night, Lauren sent text to one of her friends saying that she wanted to come home and was no longer enjoying herself. She said her friends were being mean to her and she just wanted to leave. Eventually, the group decided to call it a night between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. The next morning, Hannah, Aaron and Chris said they all awoke to find Lauren missing. Her belongings were all still by the hammock, but Lauren was nowhere to be seen. However, they didn't raise the alarm. They said that they had just assumed she had simply headed off down the cliff to start enjoying the day without them, but she'd left her shoes, phone and purse, so although possible, this theory didn't seem to make much sense. Sherry was now panicking as she hadn't heard from her daughter since the Saturday, and it was now Sunday. She began frantically calling and texting her daughter, but to no avail. Tragically, at 4:30 p.m. that Sunday, a fisherman and his son made a gruesome discovery. Lauren Agee was face down and floating in the water. It was evident that she had been dead for some time. The police arrived on scene and began a recovery process. While this was happening, Aaron Lilly paddled around the corner in a canoe and went straight over to the police. He asked if they had seen his friend, as she had gone missing. Harry and Deanna Elder, a couple who were also on the scene, said this encounter played on their minds. There had been no announcement to say that a body had been found in that location, and the timing of Aaron's entry onto the scene seemed odd. One of the officers on scene would later say that he believed Aaron had staged this encounter, and that the group likely already knew where Lauren's body was. Aaron, Chris and Hannah were all brought back to the mainland and questioned. According to police, Aaron and Chris's demeanours appeared nervous. Aaron was overheard telling the others not to mention anything and to let him do the talking. Neither Aaron, Chris or Hannah mentioned Brixner Gambrell in their statements. Although no polygraphs were ever performed, they were all questioned individually, and the stories and accounts that the three had began to change and differ massively. Despite all of Lauren's belongings being there, Aaron Lilly claimed that she had stayed at the bar in the marina and never came back to the cliff with them. This was disputed by Detective Chris Yarchuk. He was an off-duty police officer working as security for Wakefest. He remembered seeing all four of them in a canoe heading for the cliff that night, sometime around 2:30 a.m. Aaron Lilly would later change his story and said that he believed Lauren had headed off to the cliff to meet an old boyfriend. Hannah Palmer told the police that Lauren had left that morning and joined a boat of unknown people. She assumed that she had gone to spend the night with them and would return in the morning. However, during a Skype interview, Hannah would later say that she wondered if Lauren had gone to the toilet during the night and fallen off the side of the cliff.
From the time I went to sleep to the time I went awake, there's nothing. It's just a void of what was she doing? What was she thinking? Was she peeing? Was she with somebody else? I don't know.
As for Chris, who Hannah and Lauren met that weekend,
he was asleep. I didn't know him well, but people ask me, do you think he could have done it? No. I don't think he would have been physically capable without me hearing.
Hannah explains why she didn't call Lauren's parents and authorities that morning when Lauren was gone.
Everybody's like, don't worry, Lauren's the kind that can make friends with anyone. And,
right.
Okay, I try to keep calm. I searched as much as I could without having to go to every single boat. I figured she would find us.
That Skype interview was interrupted by Aaron phoning Hannah, telling her to stick to the story. In Christopher Stout's written statement, he referred to Lauren as the girl, and said that Lauren had returned to the campsite for only a few minutes before saying she was leaving to meet an ex-boyfriend. He said he had then fallen asleep and didn't feel her get out of the hammock that they were both in. Just one day after the festival had ended, he spoke about how good the weekend had been on Instagram, showing no signs that anything sinister had occurred. In the background of the shot, Hannah and Aaron are also visible. It remains unclear as to whether or not Brixner Gambrell gave any form of statement. Some of the interviews were recorded and the group could be heard giving various different accounts.
All camped out, everything was awesome. We were like, well, maybe somebody came and got her. And then we went down to the boat dock and we waited and waited and waited. And it almost seems like I'm a suspect right now, you know, but I know you guys are just doing your job.
You think she went back after y'all went to the cliff?
I honestly don't know. My honest opinion is she got up to go to the bathroom and slipped.
We all drank, had a good old time. Eventually we ended up making our way all back to the campsite. I honestly wasn't really worried about it because I didn't think anything had happened. I didn't think anything would happen.
I woke up and I woke him up and I said, "Where's Lauren?" And he said, "She got up a while ago." He was like, "But I didn't feel her or anything." And I said, "Okay, have you seen her since?" And he said, "No." And I asked how long. He said he wasn't sure. I know she probably went to pee, but she didn't have her shoes, she didn't have her keys, wallet, phone, and she would not leave without that stuff.
An autopsy was carried out and determined that Lauren's cause of death was blunt force trauma and possible drowning. She had a broken nose and fingers, and her body was bruised and battered. It was also determined that she had very little water in her lungs despite being submerged. Her blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. She also had some distinctive markings and impressions on her body, including a triangle shape on her chest. Detective Chris Yarchuk, who had watched her leaving that night, also helped in the recovery of Lauren's body. He said that he saw what he believed to be a bite mark on her chest, as well as substantial bruising to her thighs. He suggested at the time that a rape test kit be done, but no such test was performed, and her body was never swabbed for DNA. 911 calls were lost, text messages were erased, and recordings of some interviews weren't made, and the crime scene was completely contaminated. It was eventually concluded that she had fallen down the side of the cliff while intoxicated, and her death was ruled as an accident. It was also determined that there was no foul play involved, and it was nothing more than a very tragic, drunken incident. With this, DeKalb County Sheriff's Department closed the case. Sherry's gut instinct told her that this was wrong and begged for the case to be re-examined. These requests were all denied.
New tonight, family and friends want to know how a 21-year-old Hendersonville woman died in Center Hill Lake.
She camped this weekend on the edge of a cliff. Her body found Sunday in the water below.
Hannah Palmer, Chris Stout, Aaron Lilly and Brixner Gambrell were never considered suspects by the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department. Hannah and Aaron married and moved to Florida where they had a baby. Chris Stout was in and out of jail due to various parole violations and DUIs, and Brixner Gambrell moved out of state and obtained a lawyer. None of them attended Lauren's funeral, and none of them have commented or publicly engaged with the case since it closed. Cassie Franks, Lauren's friend and Aaron's ex-girlfriend, agreed with Lauren's mother Sherry, and she had concerns about what had happened that night too. She said that Aaron was violent with her during their relationship and that he had choked, bitten and beaten her. Cassie had taken pictures of her body after these attacks and even offered them to the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department. However, they declined to look at them, stating the case was closed and Aaron wasn't a suspect. Aaron also had a history of DUIs, as did Chris Stout. Just days after Lauren had been laid to rest, Sherry received a phone call from Ryan Mallinson, an officer with the White County Police Department. He, along with Chris Yarchuk, was on scene when Lauren was found. Sherry said that he told her the investigation was not handled correctly, and he believed that the people she was there with were somehow involved in her death. Sherry then spoke with both he and Detective Chris Yarchuk. Both were deeply concerned by the behaviour they had seen from both investigators and Lauren's friends.
They were extremely nervous.
In a rare step, Mellinson questions the findings of his brothers in blue, saying Aaron and Chris expressed no sympathy or concern for Lauren.
Just their body language and demeanor toward the incident told me that there was something wrong with the picture. People don't act like that unless they know something or they have something to hide.
Hannah, Aaron and Chris continued to party for the weekend and were active on social media, despite the fact that Lauren was missing. Yarchuk believed that the strange triangular print upon her body was a match for the tip of a canoe, exactly like the one he saw them heading off to the cliff in. However, that theory was quickly thrown out by the sheriff's office. They said that the mark had been made while pulling her onto the rescue boat. Yarchuk, among with many others, believed that Lauren had already died when she went into the water, which could have explained the lack of water in her lungs. However, as Yarchuk wasn't an officer with the investigating department, he had no authority to reopen the case. He did, however, encourage Sherry to pursue it. Off the back of this, Sherry hired a private detective by the name of Sheila Wysocki, and her first course of action was to have Lauren's autopsy notes re-examined. This second look concluded that Lauren had hemorrhaging in her throat. According to Sheila, the hemorrhaging was a result not of being strangled, but of being held down. Sheila also wanted answers from the police regarding the rape test kit and why one hadn't been carried out. The answer she received was that because Lauren had been wearing a tampon, she couldn't have been sexually assaulted, therefore no such test was deemed necessary. Sheila discovered that Lauren wasn't actually menstruating at the time. She contacted Lauren's GYN practitioner, and they found that the lining of Lauren's uterus confirmed she hadn't been on her cycle. Sheila also disputed the details surrounding the infamous cliff jump in which Lauren supposedly hit the back of her head. She argued that while Lauren did jump off the cliff, she didn't go into the water head first, nor did she pass out, and there was no bruising. Sherry, Sheila and Chris Yarchuk also ran some experiments and tests using a 105-pound crash test dummy. The dummy was thrown off both the 90-foot side of the cliff and the 50-foot side. On the 90-foot side, the current of the water at the time wasn't consistent with where Lauren's body had been found. If she had fallen in, she would have floated towards the marina in the opposite direction. The drop on the 50-foot side was so filled with ledges, trees and rocks that it seemed impossible to roll continuously to the bottom without something getting in the way. They used the crash test dummy almost 50 times, and every time garnered the same result.
She slipped and fell down here. Could she have made it into the water?
There's too many trees here, there's too many rocks. There's just no way. I mean, you could maybe make it to halfway down where it flattens out.
In an unscientific demonstration, he shows us his theory with a mannequin.
Similar size and weight, 105-pound dummy, and I'll just drop it going forward.
It was caught in the branches, didn't even make it down to the bottom.
Correct, it's not even halfway down.
A witness named Chris Brown came forward and said that he had seen who he was sure was Aaron Lilly on the night Lauren was last seen alive. He claims that at around midnight he saw Aaron coming out of the water, spluttering and spitting water out for several minutes. Aaron said that he had almost drowned swimming over to the marina area. This tip was turned over to the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department, and they advised that should they want to pursue this lead, they would be in contact. But that call never came. His statement remains a grey area, however, as the time frame of midnight doesn't match up with the 2:30 AM time that the majority of witnesses talked about. During an interview with Crime Watch Daily, the family's private investigator Sheila Wysocki said that she had been following up on some false stories that had been circulating around social media. She said some of the information was coming from an IP address in Florida, matching the same street that Hannah and Aaron's house was on. Sheila and Sherry believed that this was no coincidence. Sheila was convinced that the answers lay with Hannah Palmer, Aaron Lilly, Christopher Stout, and Brixner Gambrell. In December of 2016, Lauren's family filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit against the four of them in a bid to force them to talk. Aside from Chris Stout, they all ended up pleading the Fifth Amendment. Because Chris Stout was in jail at the time, pleading the Fifth may have impacted his sentence, so he took part in a deposition. This lawsuit also highlighted a lot of flaws in the handling of the case, and officers were forced to admit that a lot more could and should have been done. In March of 2017, Sherry's wrongful death lawsuit against the group was dismissed, ruling that there was insufficient evidence. Circuit Court Judge Jonathan Young threw the case out, deeming it to be ridiculous and pulled out of thin air. Sherry was told that it may only be possible to proceed if she agreed to a gagging order, preventing her from talking about the case publicly, something she felt would hinder rather than help.
Their opinions were not based on any relevant scientific methods, processes, and data, and seemed to be just pulled out of the thin air. The court finds that the plaintiff has not produced any shred of evidence that anyone intentionally harmed Miss Agee.
After the lawsuit was thrown out, over 20,000 people signed a petition begging for the case to be reopened. At the start of 2019, the Nashville Court of Appeals overturned the ruling made regarding Hannah Palmer's potential involvement in the case. It was unanimously referred to as a clearly erroneous assessment of the evidence. The court ruled that Sherry absolutely had a clear and legal right to sue for wrongful death. Despite all of this, the case currently sits in limbo, and Lauren's family and Sheila Wysocki continue their fight for answers and justice for Lauren Agee. At this stage, it is unknown whether or not the full story about what happened that night will be brought to light, but Sherry Smith is determined to fight for her daughter for as long as it takes.